Brady Tkachuk is no longer the captain of the Ottawa Senators. One of the most physical, relentless forwards in the league is now a Florida Panther, and he is joining the one player on that roster who shares his last name. For Ottawa, this is the kind of move that should genuinely terrify a fan base. A captain in the prime of his career, shipped out to join the league's newest superpower, while his brother waits for him in Florida. So what actually happened here? Who won this trade? Who lost it? And what does it mean for the rest of the league? Let's start with the trade itself. Florida sends Ottawa the 9th overall pick, and the 25th overall pick in this year's draft, a 2029 first-round pick that is top 10 protected, and a 2027 second-round pick. In return, the Panthers get Brady Tkachuk. And here's the detail that makes this even more ruthless. That 25th overall pick wasn't even Florida's originally. They acquired it earlier that same day in a separate trade with Seattle, sending forward Mackie Samoskevich to the Kraken in exchange for it, and a second-round pick next year. So in a single afternoon, Florida built an entire trade package from scratch just to go get their guy. Now this rumor has circled Ottawa for a long time. Tkachuk was the captain, the face of the franchise. But every time Ottawa struggled, the noise around his future got louder. For years, nothing ever materialized until this year. Here's what makes this one sting a little differently though. The Senators were actually good this season. Statistically, Ottawa was an analytics darling, finishing in the top 5 in the league in percentage of shots for percentage of shots on goal and percentage of expected goals. If the saves had been there early in the year, this might have been a top team in the entire Eastern Conference. Instead, the Senators made the playoffs and were swept in the first round by the defending champion Carolina Hurricanes. Tkachuk recorded 0 points across all 4 games. As recently as late April, Tkachuk publicly bristled at the idea that his name was even in trade rumors. He told reporters he was, in his words, fully committed to the Senators. But then came the part of the offseason that changes everything. Brady and Matthew Tkachuk, both on Team USA, helped the Americans win gold at the 2026 Milan Cortina Olympics, the first gold for the US men's program on Olympic ice in 46 years. And something about that tournament seemed to change the entire trajectory of his time in Ottawa. When Brady returned home following the birth of his second child at the end of April, a difficult conversation with the organization became necessary. Ottawa GM Steve Staios put it simply, this was not a decision we took lightly, but ultimately, we did what we felt was best for the long-term future of our hockey club. Tkachuk, for his part, gave Ottawa a list of only 4 teams he would accept a trade to. Florida, Carolina, Minnesota, Vegas. Sound familiar? It's almost the exact same situation his older brother created when he forced his way out of Calgary. With 2 years still left on his contract, Brady Tkachuk follows the exact same path his brother did when Matthew left the Flames. Straight into a Florida Panthers locker room that can legitimately be called a super team. So why could Florida afford to pay this kind of price? Because of an unusual season. The Panthers actually missed the playoffs this year. Right after winning back-to-back Stanley Cups, Alexander Barkov barely played all season. Sergei Bobrovsky had one of the worst years of his career. And 3 consecutive runs to the final finally caught up with his roster physically. That difficult season is exactly what handed Florida a top 10 pick in this year's draft. And instead of keeping it, they turned it into a Tkachuk reunion. Now let's talk about why this actually makes sense on the ice. Ottawa built their identity around a heavy forecheck, win the puck battle, shrink the space, get pucks to the net from low to high. That is almost identical to how Florida has won 2 Stanley Cups. A relentless forecheck, amplified by physicality, and players who never stop hunting the puck. Add a player who, over 8 seasons in Ottawa, led the franchise in goals, points, power play goals, shots, hits, game-winning goals, multi-goal games, and penalty minutes. And there is genuinely no concern about whether Brady Tkachuk fits this roster. Florida could realistically run a line of both Tkachuk brothers, with Sam Bennett at center. And if they wanted to get even more aggressive, they could throw Alexander Barkov into that mix too. Bennett in particular is the perfect connector for this. He was a Conn Smith caliber performer during Florida's title runs, constantly finding soft ice and presenting himself as an outlet the second a puck comes loose. If both Tkachuks are winning every battle along the wall, that line becomes an absolute nightmare for any defensive pairing in this league. Let's step back and actually look at what Florida's top 9 looks like now. Verhaeghe, Barkov, Reinhart, Bennett, Brady Tkachuk, Matthew Tkachuk, Lou Osterinen, Lundell, Marchand. That is genuinely disgusting. There is not a single shift on that roster where the other team gets a break, and it does not stop up front. Ekblad and Forsling on one pairing, Seth Jones right behind him. Bobrovsky is not the same goalie he was 3 or 4 years ago. Nobody is pretending he is, and here's the wrinkle. Bobrovsky is actually a free agent on July 1st, along with backup Daniil Tarasov. Florida doesn't currently have a starting goalie locked up for next season at all. But even with that uncertainty, a goalie who is simply solid, playing behind a roster this deep and this physically overwhelming might be more than enough. Florida didn't just fix their forward group with this trade. They built a roster that, on paper, does not have a single weak shift in it. But the hockey fit is really only half the story here. This is also a brother's story. Brady and Matthew are extremely close. They even launched a podcast together last year. Their father, Keith Tkachuk, scored 538 goals across 18 NHL seasons. And just one day after this trade was finalized, Keith Tkachuk was named to the 2026 Hockey Hall of Fame class. Brady called it a dream to be part of. All happening in the same week. The whole family, in fact, was together in St. Louis for Father's Day and for the baptism of Matthew's daughter when the news of the trade came through. We already saw glimpses of what this partnership could look like at the Four Nations Face-Off in 2025. And at the Olympics this past February. Brady put it simply, just seeing each other was the best part every day for 3 weeks, and just being together. And our families being together. And then, I guess that became a reality a couple days ago. Now it happens every single night. Zoom out for a second, because this trade means a lot more than just one team upgrading their forward group. This is now the 4th time Florida GM Bill Zito has made this exact kind of aggressive move. Sam Bennett from Calgary in 2021. Matthew Tkachuk from Calgary in 2022. Brad Marchand from Boston in 2025. And now Brady Tkachuk. When Zito sees a player he wants, he goes and gets him. Draft picks are just currency to him. Zito himself described it almost playfully, calling Brady the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and Florida's roster the perfect puzzle built to fit around him. Ottawa's GM Steve Stais said the move was made with the long-term future of the franchise in mind, and the key part of that sentence is what they got back. Cap space, draft capital, and the flexibility to actually improve this roster instead of standing still. There's already reporting that Ottawa inquired about a young NHL-ready piece coming back the other way, specifically Florida forward Anton Lundell, but were turned down flat. Zito views him as a foundational piece for this roster, not a trade chip. Don't be shocked, though, if Ottawa becomes a real player. In the Jason Robertson conversation this summer, he is a restricted free agent, and one of the best left-wing scorers in the league. If a long-term deal can't get done in Dallas, Ottawa has the ammunition now to make a real run at an offer sheet. There is something almost ironic about all of this. For years, Tkachuk talked about writing his own story in Ottawa, about being the guy who finally brought a Stanley Cup to a franchise that's never tasted real success. A few months after a first-round sweep, he is on his way to Florida instead. And the truth is, this wasn't exactly a fight to keep him. Once it became clear how unlikely it was that Tkachuk would commit long-term, Stais moved quickly and decisively, choosing to get ahead of the situation rather than let it drag out and turn into a distraction. So now every other team in this league has to be paying attention. Zach Werenski is sitting in Columbus, in the prime of his career, fresh off missing the playoffs for the 6th straight year. Connor Hellebuyck, the gold medal winning goaltender for Team USA, also missed the playoffs entirely this year and has been mentioned in trade rumors of his own. And then there is the biggest name of all, Auston Matthews. Toronto already went through the Marner fallout. They were one of the worst teams in the league this season, and Matthews has 2 years left on his own contract. Everyone in this league is watching to see what happens next, because if this is the new direction the NHL is heading, players controlling exactly where they want to play, exactly who they want to play alongside, then the dominoes are only just getting started. If you want to stay ahead of every domino as it falls, make sure you subscribe to Puck Chronicles. And thank you to everyone who has already subscribed and shown support for the channel.